Good morning and welcome to Pilgrim's Progress. We continue our journey with the four boys, Christiana and Mercy, with Chapter 27, Part 4. They evaluate Mr. Fearing. "Then it seems to you that he was safe at last?" asked Mr. Honest. Yes, I never had a doubt about him. He was a man of choice spirit. He just always kept himself so low that his life was burdensome to himself and troublesome to others. He was more conscious of sin than most, and he was so afraid of doing injury to others that he would often deny himself those things that were lawful. He simply refused to cause any offense. "But what can the reason be that such a good man lived his life so much of the time in the dark?" asked Mr. Honest. "The primary reason," replied Greatheart, "is that the wise God wills it that way. Some must whistle, some must weep. In the book of Revelation, the saved are compared to a company of musicians that play on their trumpets and harps and sing their songs before the throne. Mr. Fearing was one who played a bass. He and his friends made doleful sounds like a tuba. Their sounds are more sorrowful than those of other instruments. Even so, some will say that the bass is the ground of music. And for me personally, I don't care much at all for a profession that doesn't begin with a heavy heart. When the musician intends to put all his instruments in tune, the first thing that he usually touches is the bass. God also plays upon the string first when he is tuning the soul to himself. But Mr. Fearing's problem was this. He was unable to play any other music except this kind until he got to the last part of his trip. "It is clear from your account of him that he was a very zealous man," said Mr. Honest. "Difficulties, lions, or Vanity Fair, he feared none of them at all. It was only sin, death, and hell that were terror to him, because he had some doubt about his own share in the celestial country." "You're right, those are the things that were his troublemakers, and as you have observed, they arose not from a weakness of spirit, as to the practical living of a pilgrim's life, but rather from a weakness of mind. I can easily believe that, like the proverb, he would have bit a burning ember if it had stood in his way. But the things which oppressed him, no one was ever able to help him shake off easily." "Hearing about this Mr. Fearing has done me good," interjected Christiana. "I thought nobody was like me. But I can see that there is some resemblance between Mr. Fearing and myself. We only differ in two things. He was so severely distressed that he couldn't contain it. I can keep it to myself. Also, his distress was so heavy upon him that he was unable to even knock at the houses that were provided for his relief. But my fear made me knock even louder." "If I might also express myself," said Mercy, "I wish to say that I see something of him also in me, for I am always more afraid of the lake of fire and the loss of a place in paradise than I am of losing other things. I thought to myself, if only I may have the joy of having a place there, it is sufficient for me to lose all the world to win it." Then Matthew said, "Fear is something that made me think that I was far away from having within me what it takes to obtain real salvation. But if it was like this for a good man like him, would it not also go well with me?" "No fears, no grace," said James, "and even though there is not always grace where there is fear of hell, yet there is certainly no grace where there is no fear of God." "A good statement, James," said Greatheart. "You have hit the mark. For the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and it is a certainty that those who lack the beginning have neither the middle nor the end. But let us conclude our discussion of Mr. Fearing after sending him this farewell. Well, Mr. Fearing, you did fear your God and were afraid of doing anything while here that would have you betrayed. And did you fear the lake and pit? Would that others do so too. And as for those who lack your wit, they will themselves undo." Chapter 28, Part 1. The Opinions of Mr. Self-Will. Now I saw in my dream that they continued talking among themselves. After Greatheart had finished his discussion of Mr. Fearing, Mr. Honest began to tell them about another man whose name was Mr. Self-Will. He ventured to be a pilgrim, but I doubt he ever came in at the gate that stands at the head of the way. Did you ever talk to him about it? Asked Greatheart. Yes, several times, but he always resorted to acting according to his true nature, self-willed. He didn't care in the slightest what a man or reason or example had to say. He did what his own mind prompted him to do, and nothing else could sway him. Please tell me, said Mr. Greatheart, what were his principles? For I imagine you could perceive them. He believed he could follow the vices as well as the virtues of pilgrims, and that in so doing he would not jeopardize his salvation. Said Greatheart. If he had said that it is possible for the best of us to be guilty of having vices while at the same time partaking of the virtues of pilgrims, I would not fault him, for indeed we are not absolutely exempt from the power of any vice except by one condition, that we watch and strive against it. But I perceive that is not the case with him. If I understand you correctly, you mean that he was of the opinion that he had permission to be like this. Yes, that is what I mean, said Mr. Honest. This is how he believed, and what he believed was reflected in what he practiced. But what were his grounds for believing this? Asked Greatheart. Why, he said his basis was the Scriptures. I would appreciate it, Mr. Honest, if you could tell us a few of his arguments. All right, I will. He said that because David, God's beloved, had taken another man's wife, that he could therefore do the same. He said that having more than one woman was practiced by Solomon, and so therefore he was justified in doing likewise. He pointed out that Sarah and the godly midwives of Egypt had lied, as did Rahab, who was saved, and that he could therefore do the same. He also said that because the disciples went and took an owner's donkey at their master's command, that he could do likewise. He said that Jacob got his father's inheritance by cunning and deceit, and that therefore he would be justified in doing the same. Lofty arguments indeed. Are you sure he believed this? I have heard him debate his point. He always uses Scriptures in his arguments, too. This is an opinion that isn't fit to be allowed in the world, exclaimed Mr. Greatheart. I want to make sure you fully understand me. He didn't say that just anyone could do these things. He believed only those who had the same virtues as those mentioned in Scriptures should be allowed to do the same. But what could be a more false conclusion? Asked Greatheart. What he is saying is that just because good men have sinned out of their own weakness, he can presumptuously justify doing it himself? It is like saying, if a child, because of a sudden blast of wind, stumbles over a stone and falls down and gets muddy, he might as well decide to lie down and wallow in it like a hog. Who would have thought that anyone could become so blinded by the power of lust? But what is written has to be true. They will stumble because they will not listen to God's word, nor obey it, and so this punishment must follow, that they will fall. His supposition that those who addict themselves to their vices may also have the godly person's same virtues is delusion as strong as any other. It is just as if a dog should say, I either have or am able to have the qualities of a baby because I chew on his messy diaper. To chew on the sin of God's people is no sign of one who possesses their virtues. It is difficult for me to believe that one who holds this type of opinion can truly have faith or sincere love for God. I know you have made strong objections to his opinions, but what does he have to say for himself? Well, replied Mr. Honest, he says that to do these things in accordance with one's beliefs demonstrates a lot more integrity than to do them while holding a contrary opinion. A very subtle and wicked answer, said Greatheart, for while letting loose of the bridle on our lusts is bad when our convictions are against doing so, how much worse it is to sin and to argue that it is fine to do so. The first has momentarily stumbled, while a second justifies his sin and walks straight into a snare. There are many who share this man's opinions, but who do not have his boldness to speak, said Mr. Honest. Sadly, it is because of pilgrims like these that pilgrims in general have such little esteem." "What you say is certainly true," replied Greatheart, "and it is lamentable, but nevertheless the one who fears the King of Paradise will be victorious over them all." Chapter 28, Part 2. Other Unsteady Walks of Life. "There are certainly strange opinions in this world," said Christiana. "I know someone who said that he was certain he would have enough time to repent when it was his time to die. Those who hold his view are deceiving themselves," Greatheart responded. "If that same person were given a week to run 20 miles in order to save his life, he wouldn't wait until the last hour to do it." "This is correct," said Mr. Honest, "and yet so many of those who consider themselves pilgrims do that very thing. As you can see, I am an old man. I have been a traveler on this road for quite some time, and I have observed many things. Why, I have seen some who have set out as if they would set the world on fire, and yet they have died in the wilderness within a few days. They weren't able to catch even a glimpse of the promised land. I have also seen some who have shown no promise at all when they first set out. One would have doubted that they could survive even for a day, and yet they proved to be very good pilgrims. I have seen some who have run forward hastily, who have, after a short time, run right back again just as quickly. I have seen some who have spoken very highly of a pilgrim's life at first, but then in a short time have spoken just as strongly against it. I have heard some who, when they first set out for paradise, have said that there is undoubtedly such a place. Then when they have almost gotten there, they have come back again saying that it doesn't exist. I have heard some brag about what they will do when they face the opposition, but who have, in the face of even a false alarm, abandoned the faith and fled from the pilgrim's way. Now as they were walking on their way and still talking, someone came running to meet them. He said, "If you love your lives, you had better change your course, for there are robbers up ahead." Then Greatheart said, "Those would be the 3 who once plundered Little Faith. Well, we are ready for them." So they kept to their way. They carefully looked around every bend in the road, expecting to see these villains at any time. But whether they had heard of Greatheart, or whether they had found some other diversion, they never appeared. And we'll stop there for today. Next week we'll pick up with Chapter 28, Part 3. They come to Gaius's inn. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.